Hello.
Welcome back to the Space School. Today we're doing part 2 of What If Luke Was Trained by Revan. Before we begin, special thanks to all of our patrons. The season finale to our miniseries is this Saturday. Our story continues on the planet of Coruscant. With the Emperor dead, the Empire needed to do something about the hole in leadership. If they didn't do something about it, then they would be doomed by a power gap in the galaxy. Palpatine hadn't yet fully taken power away from the Senate, and with Palpatine dead, the Senate could very easily take more control over the Senate itself, and move power away from the Galactic Empire's military-industrial complex. It's something that someone like Tarkin was especially concerned about. With Vader and Tarkin in the same room, Tarkin, still embracing his favorability with the Emperor, told the room that he would be taking over control of the Empire, effective immediately. Vader whipped around his head towards Tarkin. The Grand Moff saw this as an absolute threat, which it was. Vader towered over Tarkin, but he didn't fear the henchmen of the Sith Lord. He told Vader that there was nothing he could do to convince the Empire to listen to him. Vader raised his hand, and Tarkin slowly started to lose the ability to breathe. He looked at Vader. The Dark Lord of the Sith spoke up.
They don't need to listen to me. They need to listen to my puppet. And you are not my puppet.
Tarkin's neck snapped and he dropped to the ground. Without a second thought, Vader turned around towards the Royal Guard and told them to make sure that Mas Amedda was in the former Emperor's office. Their job afterwards would be to clean up the mess behind him. Vader within the coming hour would arrive in the former Emperor's office. Mas Amedda would arrive and look at Vader sitting in Palpatine's former seat. When the Grand Visor arrived in the Emperor's office, he was surprised to see Vader. He was very unaware of the fact that the Emperor had been killed, so seeing Vader sit in his master's seat was a little bit interesting. Vader didn't hold back. He immediately started talking to Mas Amedda, informing him that an assassin killed Palpatine inside of his castle. Vader would be taking control over the Empire now. However, Vader would not represent the face of the Galactic Empire. Vader admitted he wasn't the political genius that Palpatine was. However, he was the new de facto leader of the Empire. Mas Amedda, on the other hand, would represent the face of the Empire. Essentially, to the general public, it would look like nothing changed. The reason being is that Palpatine very rarely made a public appearance. Even in the Senate, where he ruled with an iron fist, he rarely showed himself. It's because as Emperor, he technically didn't need to, and so the majority of the time Mas Amedda would preside over the Senate as the Grand Visor. Vader's orders were simple.
You will do as I say. You will not go outside the realm of my control. You will make sure the Empire does not fail, and I will destroy my rival.
Mas Amedda nodded his head. He knew better than to try and openly challenge Vader, though something ironic about Vader's rise to power was what he did with it. Darth Vader, being a former slave, decided that it was unnecessary for the Empire to be using slave labor. However, he was not opposed to using prison slave labor, which at this point was contributing to major projects across the Empire, such as Project Stardust, under the control of Director Krennic. Vader's first move was to achieve revenge, though not revenge on the one who liberated him from his master. It was revenge on the individuals that caused him so much pain, the Crime Lords. Palpatine allowed the Crime Lords to flourish. If they got too big, then he sent a couple destroyers to quiet them down. Vader, on the other hand, was forged through the implementation of suffering in the Outer Rim, and he was not going to allow that to continue. Without someone to keep a leash around Vader, he was the ultimate power in the universe, though the one fear was whoever killed Palpatine could likely kill him. At the moment, that didn't matter. He would find that rival in the Force and kill them. Right now, he was taking an Imperial fleet to the Outer Rim, and he was going to dispatch all the Crime Lords. While his father was about to rip through the Outer Rim, Obi-Wan was talking to Luke Skywalker on the planet of Tatooine. Obi-Wan had a lot to reveal to the son of Anakin Skywalker. They had kind of covered the lineage, only on the count that Luke figured out that Obi-Wan was hiding information from him. Obi-Wan wouldn't have made it clear otherwise, if Luke wasn't so attuned to the Force as he was. Obi-Wan first started with showing Luke how to levitate objects. Yes, Luke figured out how to do that previously, but it wasn't a controlled means of lifting and moving objects. Obi-Wan wanted to show Luke how to control himself and his mind when he was levitating objects. It would first help him become a Jedi, and secondly, it would help him lift heavier objects with more control. Obi-Wan was helping Luke connect himself deeply to the Force. He was already intertwined with the Force, but now that he had the guidance of a Jedi Master like Obi-Wan Kenobi, could be incredibly necessary for him. What Revan did for Luke was open him up to the possibilities of the Force and what it could do for him. For Obi-Wan, he would begin to study the holocron of Revan. He hadn't ever opened it before, and he believed that if he studied it, he'd be able to help Luke where he failed Anakin. Having taught Anakin, Obi-Wan was more than prepared for training Luke. But this holocron had information that he needed, information that not even the Jedi of the Galactic Republic utilized. Revan's era was one of chaos and of war. His information was vital to this time of chaos and war now. Obi-Wan having the mindset of, no matter how much he knew, he always had more to learn. But Obi-Wan wouldn't just study the holocron by himself. He would go through it, find the information he was searching for, and show Luke Skywalker said information. It was a combined effort from both legendary Jedi Masters from their respective eras. Luke, having already unlocked the Force within himself, had a very easy time learning alongside Obi-Wan. Revan spoke an older form of Galactic Common, and so for Luke, it was a bit hard to understand what he was saying. Obi-Wan was able to break it down in each lesson, with each teaching for Luke. On the other side of the sands of Tatooine, Owen and Beru were losing their minds. They had been searching for Luke for days, and even worse than that, Obi-Wan was nowhere to be seen. Owen knew that Obi-Wan was leaving their area so that Luke could grow alone, so it could only mean one thing, that Luke likely got abducted by the Tusken Raiders, just like Owen's stepmother had. Because Owen considered Luke to be his son, he and Beru left the homestead and made their way to find the Tusken Raiders that likely took their son away from them. In the Outer Rim, a fleet emerged from hyperspace. A number of Star Destroyers were present. Out from the Star Destroyers, Imperial dropships departed for the surface. Behind them was Lord Vader's personal shuttle. The Crimson Dawn had gathered up at the homeworld of the Pike Syndicate on their homeworld of Obadiah. It wasn't just the Pikes or Crimson Dawn, their allies were all present, various representatives from other pirate gangs, the Hutts, and the Black Sun. They were blindsided by the Imperial assault. Vader's flagship ripped through the Crimson Dawn super yacht, and dropships avoided flak. When they landed, Imperial stormtroopers rushed from the dropships and got into combat with the pirates of Crimson Dawn. Maul knew that his operation had been discovered, but there was a rival here. It was Lord Vader. If Maul killed Vader, then he would be the one true Sith Lord. Of course, Maul being unaware that Darth Krayt was elsewhere in the Outer Rim. Maul, instead of falling back, tactically decided to hold the palace on Obadiah, forcing the various members of the crime families to fight back. At the same time, an Imperial invasion fleet arrived over Ord Mantell, Nal Hutta, and Tatooine. Their main targets were the Black Sun and the Hutt crime family. Vader had all this ready to go, and once Palpatine was dead, he initiated it without a second thought. Crime lords were so blindsided that they weren't able to defend themselves. The few bounty hunters around were no match, and they either fled or were subsequently executed alongside their bosses. On Obadiah, Vader's shuttle landed, and he walked through the rubble of his invasion. There was numerous dead stormtroopers around him as he walked through the rubble. Vader didn't budge as blaster fire flew past him. The stormtroopers on the front lines were trying to break through the palace defenses, and they couldn't. That would be no issue for Lord Vader. He raised his hand and the palace doors shattered open. Stormtroopers rose from their feet and ran forward. They knew better than to wait for Vader. The commander of the troopers ran up to Vader, telling him that they had to breach on the far side of the base, but they lost communication with the men and the team that breached. Vader swiftly told the commander to leave that to him. On the other side of the palace, stormtroopers barged through the back door, and they confronted Darth Maul. The aging Sith assassin cut down the stormtroopers as they piled in. Maul was luring Lord Vader to his position because that's what he wanted. He wanted Vader to play his game, and that's what Vader was going to do. The Dark Lord came around the far side of the palace. He looked around silently as his breathing echoed down the hallway. The red face that he last saw so many years ago as a boy in Naboo emerged. He wasn't wearing a hood, but he had aged. Vader stopped in his tracks, kicking a stormtrooper's arm out from under his heavy boots. Maul stepped forward.
So good to see you. Lord Vader, isn't it? Have you finally killed my former master? After realizing how expendable you were, it did take you long enough. You're not much for conversation, Dark Lord. No final words to say?
You are nothing.
Vader ignited his lightsaber and dragged his blade through the air forward. Maul jumped backwards, igniting his own lightsaber and clashing with Vader. Maul knew he had a significant disadvantage here. At this point, he hadn't realized that Vader was Anakin, but he did know that Vader had the height advantage. For someone like Maul, he had to fight a consistent uphill battle against a man constructed of metal. However, this didn't mean that Maul was helpless. He, after all, was the one who trained the powerhouse duelist that was his brother Savage Oprez. Maul was able to go toe-to-toe with Sidious, and he had no issue believing that he could best the pawn of Sidious. Vader and Maul smacked their blades together, and Maul was thrown off balance. Each of Vader's strikes got heavier and heavier. Maul was thrown from his balance every time he parried or blocked a strike from Vader. The Dark Lord was hulking. and he had been craving a victory ever since Kenobi bested him a few short months beforehand. Out from the corner, Kiera leapt forward, using Dryden Voss's electric knives. Vader didn't even take his attention off of Maul, as he beat down on Maul, throwing Maul from his feet once more, and reaching out with the Force, choking Kiera in midair. She dropped her weapons, and she stopped simultaneously in midair. Vader didn't give her a moment, snapping her neck and then standing over Maul.
Did you really think you could defeat me?
I know who you are. You are Kenobi's student. You are the chosen one, the one who brought forth the downfall of the Jedi. Did your former master do that to you?
Vader swung down, trying to slice through Maul, but missing. Maul got to his feet and jumped back, trying his best to avoid Vader's strikes. The wall was destroyed open by Vader. He was beyond pissed. He was called out. There was no feasible way that any being could know who he was. Anakin Skywalker was dead, and so would Maul be. Maul cried out, trying to plead with Vader.
I only wish to join you in accomplishing our similar goal, in defeating Kenobi.
I don't need you.
Vader raised his hand and Maul lifted from the ground and was dragged into his grip. Vader lowered his lightsaber and squeezed. Maul kicked his metal feet, but he couldn't go anywhere. He used the Force to pull his weapon towards his hand. He grabbed it and ignited it, but before he could strike Vader with the weapon, Vader so elegantly twisted his hand and Maul's life ended. He dropped the body of Maul and walked forward, before seeing a mob of pirates running away from the stormtroopers. Vader, inside of his mask, smiled, igniting his lightsaber once more, stepping down the hallway, ripping apart the wall, throwing pieces of the wall at the pirates, before swiping down on them, cutting them apart and stabbing others. He blocked the few blaster shots that came his way, before making the rest of them suffer painful deaths. The few stormtroopers who came forward watched in awe, and then backed off, lining the edges of the hallway as Vader stormed forward, walking past the stormtroopers. There were echoes of blaster fire throughout the palace, but it was dying down. When Vader got back to his shuttle, the Imperial commander told him that the Hutts, the Black Sun, and the various others across the galaxy had been destroyed. The Empire was victorious. On Tatooine, Obi-Wan and Luke went on a journey throughout the desert. With the Empire appearing on Tatooine, Ben decided to voyage deep into the desert to avoid the possible attack of the Empire or the Inquisitorius. Not to think he couldn't defeat the Inquisitors or Vader again, he just didn't want to risk it with Luke in his hands. Though the Empire was simply there for a completely unrelated reason. As for Owen and Beru, they were slaughtered by the Tusken Raiders, who had nothing to do with Luke's disappearance. Their death happened while Luke and Ben were out on their miniature journey, and neither one of them felt it through the Force. Regardless, Luke's training was going really well. The holocron of Revan was integral to his training process. Inside of the holocron were holograms that showed Luke what Revan was doing. The holocron itself was very visual. However, while the two of them were out in the desert, Obi-Wan handed Luke his father's weapon. The lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker now belonged to him. Ben showed Luke how to wield the weapon, which essentially entailed allowing the energy of the lightsaber to bind with his own energy. It's something every Jedi and every lightsaber user knew. To wield a lightsaber took energetic knowledge and alignment. If one had neither of them, then they would struggle to wield such a weapon. A regular lightsaber, such as Anakin's lightsaber, wasn't nearly as heavy as a darksaber, for example, but they were all something that required energetic intelligence. Once Luke learned how to energetically tie himself to the weapon, Ben told him,
Luke, I will be returning to the homestead. This is for your own growth. I know that the Tuskens frequent this area, and you will be scared. But with your training thus far and what I have shown you, I want you to trust in the Force. This holocron will guide you. When you are ready, you will be able to find me. May the Force be with you.
Luke didn't at all know how to respond. He was being left in the desert alone, and a part of the desert where the Tusken Raiders came often, though Luke didn't know the true power of the weapon he was holding. The lightsaber in his hands had been the one used to slaughter not just younglings, but the men, women, and children of the Tusken Raiders. It was done over someone who was closer to Luke than he'd ever known, considering Shmi was buried right outside of his bedroom his entire life. Luke would spend 5 days and 5 nights in the desert. Every waking moment he spent in the desert, he was not just afraid, but tested. If they were on Dagobah, this would have been similar to going down into the caves of Dagobah, but considering Tatooine wasn't exactly as force powerful as Dagobah, Obi-Wan had to do with what he could with what was available. During the 5 days, Luke had all the necessary supplies to make sure he didn't starve to death or dehydrate. Though something incredible happened. He spent all 5 days with the holocrons learning how to use the lightsaber, and because Obi-Wan forced him to survive survive on his own, he became a beacon of the Force. During the time that Luke was in the desert, Obi-Wan had been preparing a surprise for his young student for when he returned to the homestead. A little further away in the Outer Rim, a ship crashed onto the barren landscape of Mustafar. The Sith Lord Darth Krayt escaped Coruscant and searched for a dark side nexus, which led him to the planet Lord Vader called home. At this point, he hadn't realized that Vader called Mustafar home. Most of the planet had begun to heal, lava was lessening, and there were mostly just small streams of lava that crossed the great mountainous landscape of the planet. When Darth Krayt landed, he was searching for guidance from the Force, from the dark side. The guidance he picked up on was the essence of Lord Momin, though it wasn't what he really thought it was. Krayt limped across the sulfur landscape, crunching onto the terrain with each step he took, trying to keep his balance. Admittedly, it was difficult though. Palpatine put him through the ringer, and he couldn't really stand all that well, let alone walk. The essence he was searching for sat beneath a large structure. Krayt yet hadn't figured out that Vader's castle was newly constructed. Krayt, having been from Tatooine, didn't know that Mustafar used to be filled with volcanoes and oceans of lava. Nowadays, it didn't have the same level of magma, so naturally he assumed that Vader's castle belonged to the essence of Lord Momin, and that Vader's castle was a really ancient relic of the Sith. The truth is that Momin had been defeated by Vader only years before. Krayt didn't know what he was looking for. He made his way into the cave system below the castle and found a stone slab lined up against a wall. There were a small fire burning inside the cave as well. He's very confused by what this could possibly be, and then he heard the breathing. Krayt was very confused. All of a sudden, the essence of Momin vanished, and it was replaced by something much larger, much darker. Vader had set this trap for whoever killed his master. This wasn't revenge by any means, but Vader assumed that if someone could just kill Palpatine, then it could be a threat to him as well. But that was the opposite. Vader towered over a wounded Darth Krayt. The Sith wasn't going to back down from Lord Vader. However, there wouldn't be time for something like that for Darth Krayt. Vader stepped forward, and without igniting a lightsaber or appearing as a threat, more so than his presence already was, he reached out his hand. He could feel that Krayt was powerful, but not quite as powerful as the Emperor. How could that be? How could Krayt have been able to kill Sidious? It must have been by happenstance, but even that seemed far-fetched. Vader lifted Krayt off the ground with the Force, without choking him as he questioned the Sith.
Who are you? Why are you here?
I am Krayt. I assume I killed your master. I've come for knowledge of the dark side.
I am no teacher.
Then I seek allegiance. There's a growing light in the galaxy. You've had to have felt it.
There is no light. I've extinguished it, you fool.
You can't rule the galaxy. Something is coming for you.
Nothing can stop me, Krayt. Not Palpatine, not Maul, not any Jedi, and most certainly not you.
In an instant, Krayt's life was snapped out of existence. Vader dropped the Sith Lord to the ground in shame, too. He actually would have liked to ally himself with the Sith, but he decided to challenge him. Vader knew that no light was coming for him. The only challenge to him was Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Obi-Wan had gone missing once again. Other than Obi-Wan, or even the unlikely prospect of running into Master Yoda, there was no reason for Vader to fear anything. The irony of the whole situation involving Darth Krayt is the fact that it told Vader that he could have killed Sidious this entire time, and yet he didn't. With all the extra time and power, Vader made an effort of focusing on the Force more. But it did get better than that. He made a specific concentrated effort on being the Emperor of the galaxy. He, of course, wasn't involved in anything revolving around politics. If you thought Anakin hated politicians, imagine what Vader thought. Vader's regime was one with no brown-nosing. The Imperial officers who appeared to be trying to gain favorability with the new Emperor were quickly killed off. Vader had those he respected, and those who were very close to being on his hit list. One of those individuals close to being on his hit list was Director Krennic, but his importance on Project Stardust was a bit more concerning to him than being on the hit list. Vader was very interested in what his master had been hiding from him, because there were certainly dozens of documents and information that Palpatine didn't want him to know or have. So what could it be? Vader searched far and wide for answers, and this would boil down to interrogating former Palpatine loyalists. For Vader, interrogation wasn't exactly too difficult to deal with. He was, well, after all, Darth Vader. The skull of a mask and heavy breathing, and the little fact that he stood like a skyscraper, was intimidating enough. Very soon, Vader learned of a location on the planet of Wayland, so he made a journey to the core world to find out what he could find at the facility named Mount Tantus. On the planet of Tatooine, Luke would make his way back to Obi-Wan, after being alone for 5 full days, and he would find his surprise. The 5 days that Luke was out there was entirely his choice. Ben wanted Luke to spend time out in the desert alone, and he was free to come back whenever he wanted, whether that be 2 hours after he left or 2 weeks. Regardless, when Luke returned, he saw a taller man that he didn't recognize, and next to him was a little girl. Bail Organa turned around, and the last time he saw Luke, the boy was actually just an infant. Obi-Wan spoke up, telling Luke,
Luke, come over here. I want to introduce you to your twin sister.
The young boy didn't know how to process it. When Leia turned around, it was as if in that very moment, everything besides what Ben had told her earlier on their little journey, she knew that Luke was her brother. Not to mention that Leia did have memories of her mother before she died, so seeing Luke was like seeing family, real family, not the dreary cousins that she had on Alderaan. Luke looked at Leia a little skittishly. He wasn't antisocial by any means, but he also didn't have a lot of friends or relationships that his father had in Mos Espa. Luke was solitary a lot of the time, or if he wasn't, he was with his aunt and uncle. Obi-Wan brought Luke over to his side and told Luke that
Bail was kind enough to bring Leia here. I will be taking over your training for the time being. We will be going to Alderaan because of the Empire's recent invasion of Tatooine. But we have to be careful. It appears the Empire had gotten a little more open with making itself present in the Outer Rim.
Luke, of course, had the choice to go. But how could he say no? Luke didn't hate sand like his father did, but he never really cared for Tatooine, and without knowing his aunt or uncle were dead, he didn't really care to see an issue with leaving Tatooine behind, so he agreed. On the trip from Tatooine to Alderaan, Leia and Luke would get to talking. When Bail and Leia showed up at Obi-Wan's homestead on the second day that Luke was in the desert, Obi-Wan told Leia everything that he had told Luke, aloud by Bail. There was one issue for Obi-Wan, and it wasn't a glaring one as it was with Luke, but Bail Organa and Breha Organa were deeply attached to Leia. Sure, they wanted Leia to go out into the galaxy and grow up and become sophisticated. They were Alderaanian, of course. But Leia was their daughter still. In their eyes, she was their legitimate daughter, and for Leia, she never really accepted Vader as her real father, because to her, her father couldn't be so vile. So the feeling was mutual between Leia, Breha, and Bail. Obi-Wan didn't want Bail or Breha to treat him in the same way that Owen and Beru did. The plus side is that Bail and Obi-Wan were already good friends, so the likelihood of that happening was actually very low. Mos Espa, on the other hand, was erupting into chaos. While the Sith and the Empire were drastically evil as a regime, the truth is the crime lords, especially Jabba the Hutt, had a very important role here on Tatooine. As a daimyo of Mos Espa, with Jabba removed, all the order and balance of the city would deteriorate. It would turn into a chaotic war zone, and there would be terror that the Empire didn't care enough to worry about, because no one did. And because Jabba was the target of the attack, Major Daimyo Bib Fortuna, Jabba's right-hand man, was also killed. So there wasn't a legitimate replacement for Mos Espa, and the people of the major Tatooine city would suffer because of it. On Alderaan, Luke and Leia would be taken into the forest by Ben. Bail and Breha got Luke and Ben situated. Of course, they had to be careful, so Ben was given a small estate outside the main city, whereas Luke was able to take up residence inside of a room next to his sisters in the main palace. He was also outfitted with the royal attire. This was a decision made by Obi-Wan, Bail, and Breha before any of the moves were made from Tatooine to Alderaan, because they wanted Luke and Leia to get along without either of them feeling like they were being cheated or treated any differently than the other. The only issue was the lack of lightsaber for Leia, but Obi-Wan always came prepared. He gave Leia his own lightsaber. He knew she would use it in the future and that she was the future, just like her brother, and so she was to wield his lightsaber until she was ready to make her own. However, that would take time, just as it did for Luke. Leia had to learn about everything else regarding the Jedi and their teachings. The influence that Revan had on the Skywalker twins was indescribable. There were certain lessons they got from him that many of the Jedi from Obi-Wan's era hadn't had. The first lesson for the twins, one that only was utilized by one of them, was the ability of psychometry. It was something that Obi-Wan knew Quinlan Vos to use, but he didn't know where Quinlan was. Obi-Wan was one of the many Force users that couldn't use it. It's something Luke also couldn't use. It was a natural gift that Leia possessed. Vice versa, something Revan taught was Force Drain, which Luke was especially gifted with, though both Luke and Obi-Wan agreed that it wasn't in anyone's best interest to use such a power. The second lesson, the one that included both twins, was Force Bond. The ability was, again, a rare ability. Revan was just an individual who was insanely gifted, and his bond with Bastila was something that just didn't happen often. It was almost like a gift from the Force, if you will. Similarly, because Luke and Leia met at such a young age, they were instructed by two legendary Jedi Masters on how to truly and properly use the Force, and they had no issues with learning these incredible abilities. There was one issue, though. Because Obi-Wan was unaware of Leia's psychometric abilities, when she held his lightsaber, she saw so much, and she felt incredible pain, having to see her father on Mustafar, and then she saw her father do something that Obi-Wan distinctly left out. One night, Leia would leave the comfort of her palace room and run to Obi-Wan's home. He could feel the concern coming from her, and he woke from his sleep. Ben left his residence to find her in the forest, and when he did, she was in tears. Leia had a lot of emotional baggage to unpack with Obi-Wan. She saw everything, from the Clone Wars to the fight on Mustafar, and then Leia couldn't even say it. And then the final confrontation not more than a year before. Leia never understood why Obi-Wan left the path during their escape from the Imperial Star Destroyer, but now it all made sense. She couldn't tell if she was angry or if she understood. Leia distributed several instances of knowing more than what others said. She even did this with Obi-Wan, and she could tell what he was feeling. She couldn't understand. Why would he let Vader live? What would possess Obi-Wan to let Anakin live twice? He was and is so evil. He caused so much pain and so much suffering. Why? Obi-Wan looked down at Leia and he apologized.
I'm sorry, Leia. I never realized you could see the past through the lightsabers. They're so high in energy, I never knew you'd lock onto those memories. But the truth is, Leia, in both circumstances, I looked into the eyes of Vader, and all I saw was the little boy I raised. All I could see was the pupil I had for 13 years of my life. Anakin wasn't just a friend, he was my brother. Leia, I loved your father with all my heart, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. Vader or Anakin, when I see his face, all I see is the kid I met on Tatooine.
Leia looked at Ben. There was a moment of silence between the two of them. Obi-Wan thought about Anakin's lightsaber, the one that Luke wielded. Obi-Wan couldn't let Leia touch that lightsaber. Leia looked down at the lightsaber that belonged to Obi-Wan. Both of the lightsabers were set on the table next to each other. The kids weren't allowed to have those weapons inside the palace. Leia looked back at Obi-Wan. It's like they could speak without saying a word. Leia knew she couldn't touch her father's lightsaber. She also didn't want to bring this up further. Obi-Wan spoke up though.
Leia, you have a gift. A friend of mine, another Jedi, had the same gift you have. He once told me that as a child it was difficult for him to handle. I will do my best to help you through this. Just remember, Leia, I'm always going to be on your side.
Leia smiled, and then she put her hands on Obi-Wan's. To Leia, as much as she loved her adopted parents, Ben was like a father to her in a way, almost more than Bail could ever be, because Obi-Wan was inextricably connected back to Anakin Skywalker, and it made their bond so very much more so like father and daughter. Ben and Luke had a very solid connection too, and it was tight, but just not as tight as Ben and Leia. Most of their connection was built through the traumatic event of nearly a year beforehand, so it made sense why they were so close. Across the stars, the Empire would grow exponentially. With Vader at the helm, the Imperial Industrial Complex would explode. This again is because Vader didn't tolerate Imperial officers trying to gain favorability. If there was someone caught trying to suck up, then they'd be executed. No one would get higher by trying to sabotage their colleagues. Only the best would be the best. It's why Vader liked Thrawn. However, Thrawn did test him from time to time, and that's because Thrawn was fairly confident that Vader was Anakin Skywalker. He wasn't entirely sure, but it was a theory. Correct as it was. Vader, on the other hand, was following a breadcrumb trail across the galaxy. After arriving on Mount Tantus, he discovered a secret cloning facility, and then a sequence of words played out from his mind, and it was rather obvious. Maybe he was being ridiculous or paranoid, but to Vader it seemed as if Palpatine was somehow trying to be alive. It was possible. But was it plausible? He saw his dead body. Maybe Palpatine's thread of loyalists went deeper, and so he backed away from the Empire and traced it down. The next 5 years would be full of learning endeavors for the Skywalker twins. Leia and Luke at this point were both 16 and both incredible. Ben had a lot to learn about teaching, and having opened himself up to the teachings of Revan, was able to aid Luke and Leia in their growth as a Force user individually. The balance and harmony between the powerful light and powerful dark allowed Luke and Leia to come into their own as very incredible, powerful Force users. Their lightsaber training was off the charts. Inspired by Revan, both Luke and Leia were proficient in Form 4. However, because of her bond to Obi-Wan, Leia adopted more so around Form 3, which made her essentially a mini version of Ben, because Obi-Wan used Form 4 until he moved on into Form 3 after Qui-Gon's death. It was kinda ironic. The two of them also constructed new lightsabers, but this didn't stop a teenage Leia from discovering what her father did by using her psychometric abilities on his old lightsaber. The Skywalker twins, especially Luke, relished on Alderaan, but change was happening in the galaxy. First, it was noticed on Aldhani, and then on Ferrix. But the beginning of rebellion was so deep-rooted across the galaxy. It also formed on Lothal with a duo of 2 Jedi that were able to kill the Grand Inquisitor. Vader didn't really care. He deployed someone else to deal with it, and that someone else happened to be Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn wasn't playing around, especially considering he was trying to begin the creation of the TIE Defender project, but Mas Amedda wasn't allowing it, and Vader had just come back from Palpatine's greatest hits tour, seeing every cloning facility, every Sith planet, and finding absolutely nothing in the way of Palpatine being alive. Vader was just paranoid, having spent as much time as he did searching for Palpatine. Though the irony being that if Krayt attempted to kill Palpatine at least a decade later, Palpatine would have likely been able to survive. But it also was too early for his contingency plans to really go into effect, so they didn't. Vader, having returned, would set himself up inside the Jedi Temple and restructure it into his own version of the castle that Palpatine first had. Vader felt no sign of what Krayt had been talking about, but he was also disconnected from the galactic events that had been happening and the few rebellions that had been popping up, but it didn't really worry him. With Project Stardust nearing completion, it wouldn't really be that much of a worry. However, Vader, unlike Palpatine, liked the idea of Thrawn constructing the TIE Defender. It seemed a lot more feasible for the Imperial military, if at the very least, every fleet can have a squadron of these super TIE fighters. Especially based off of Rebel attack patterns, it made perfect sense. Vader knew the Rebels were guerrilla fighters. After all, one of them was taught how to be a guerrilla fighter by Anakin himself on Onderon. A superweapon like Stardust might be effective at coaxing a planet, but the galaxy wouldn't stand for an Imperial regime that frequently detonated planets. On the other hand, the TIE Defender would likely be the perfect counterattack made by Rebel fleets, which were typically hit-and-run battles, where the Rebellion would jump in, do damage, and then immediately flee. Vader trusted Thrawn to take down the Rebels, and so Project Stardust would be cut funding, temporarily, as to make room for the TIE Defender program that was being launched on Lothal, in an effort to deal with the Rebels. Bail Organa would eventually receive word that the Rebels on Lothal were being threatened with a new weapon. Obi-Wan knew it was time, especially because he'd heard that there were reports of 2 Jedi already present out on Lothal. The Jedi needed to come together. Obi-Wan believed the Jedi could still be saved, and so he would go and reunite with the few survivors left in the galaxy. The 3 Jedi, thanks to Bail Organa, would unite with Kanan Jarrus and the rest of Ghost Squadron. The rebels of Ghost Squadron had already amassed a strong enough force to draw the attention of the Empire, and enough attention to have Thrawn knocking on their doorstep. Ben was a little worried about his presence would do, because it would likely draw the attention of Vader. And this time, Vader had 6 years to think about everything that had happened since their last encounter, and he would likely have shimmered down a little bit, and become a little bit more patient by now. Vader may have made the mistake twice, but surely he wouldn't make it again. It's alright, this time, Obi-Wan had allies, but these allies had their backs up against the wall. It was at this moment Obi-Wan realized the real effect that he had. He was a renowned Jedi Master. It may have been 16 years since the Clone Wars, but he was one of the most known faces during the war, entire war effort actually. Everyone knew his name, just like they knew Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano. Their names were on billboards across the entire Republic, because they were the heroes of the Republic. For people serving the rebels who were too young during the war, they knew his face. For rebels who watched the Republic turn into dictatorship, they also knew his face and his name. He had a transcendence appearance, but you would never know it because of how humble he was, though this attention was what got Vader's attention. Imperial spies found Kenobi and reported it to Imperial High Command. While Vader was beelining it to the Outer Rim, from Coruscant the rebels were planning on an operation. Considering both Luke and Leia were taught how to fly by none other than Obi-Wan, and their genes permitted them to both be excellent pilots, the rebels along with Kanan and Ezra had enough solid pilots to take every single Imperial TIE Defender inside of Lothal's testing base. But that wasn't enough. They were also capturing someone else, someone who was integral to everything in the Imperial Strategic High Command. The assault would be launched, and it would catch Admiral Thrawn and Governor Pryce completely off guard, though it wasn't as sudden as a Saw Gerrera attack, which typically were more aligned with insurgency. This was an attack that aligned more with the hope and dream for change in the galaxy. The strike was quick. The Empire had its test runs at night, so to avoid possible rebel cells finding the TIE Defender location, and that didn't work too well because of Bail Organa. The 4 Jedi ran into the base, incapacitating every single guard. They each got into their their respective starfighters, and then the few other rebels got into their own ships. The TIE Defender that was running its test was shot out of the sky as it crashed down onto the ground. The Ghost ship barreled out of the sky. Governor Price and Admiral Thrawn called out the guard to fire on the ship, but the anti-aircraft was shut down, thanks to Chopper, and the guards were all taken out. The entire fleet of TIE Defenders rose from the surface and pulled away. Thrawn pulled out his pistol, and before he could fire a single shot, his blaster was pulled away from his hands with the Force. He turned around, and Obi-Wan was standing at the edge of the ramp of the Ghost, where he used the Force to pull both Governor Price and Admiral Thrawn towards the vessel. Hera over the comms yelled over, telling Obi-Wan to get into the ship. Obi-Wan looked up, and the sound of a TIE Advanced fighter came bolting down to the surface of the planet, firing its blasters away. Both Thrawn and Price were killed by Vader's loose shots. Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber and told Hera to go. Vader landed a solid number of shots on the Ghost itself, throwing it into the command center while the bay doors were still open, which threw Obi-Wan from the ship. Hera pulled away as she tried to engage a dogfight with Vader, but he was already booking it around, trying to hunt the rebels and the TIE Defenders. Both Luke and Leia knew it was Vader. Using their Force bond, they communicated with each other. They then told the rest of the rebels to escape with the TIE Defenders. They would deal with the TIE Advanced. The twins ripped their ships back around in search for Vader. The Ghost limped its way away from Vader as it got behind the rest of the TIE Defenders, trying to escape. Luke and Leia were both clipped by a flyby, and Vader rounded the ship around, seeing that Kenobi was on the landing strip. Luke and Leia also saw this. Kenobi wasn't much of a fighter anymore. He was nearing his 60s, and he wasn't exactly in the best shape for combat. No matter, the TIE fighters zeroed in, and Kenobi ignited his weapon and launched it towards Vader's ship, whipping the lightsaber forward. He used the Force to guide blaster bolts away from him as Vader's TIE got closer and closer. The lightsaber landed in the cockpit, smashing through the control panel. Then Luke clipped the side of Vader's ship with the TIE Defender weapon systems. Kenobi ducked, and the TIE fighter slammed into the ground behind him. Obi-Wan looked back at the wreckage of flames. Obi-Wan was unarmed. He no longer had his lightsaber to fight Vader with, but the two TIE Defenders pulled around and landed. Obi-Wan tried to tell the Skywalker children to get back, but they wouldn't listen, just like Anakin wouldn't. Leia got in front of Ben, igniting her lightsaber as her brother followed suit. Obi-Wan watched as from the fires came a shadowy figure. Obi-Wan told the two of them that he was unarmed. They would have to use all their training against Vader to try and take him out without him. Leia looked back and smiled as she turned around.
I see you were trying to restart the Jedi, Kenobi. Trust me, young ones, the dark side is a pathway to many more abilities than this feeble old Jedi can teach you.
We are no ordinary Jedi, Anakin.
Leia stepped forward. Vader was furious. He tried to sever any connection to Anakin Skywalker and this youngling. Then Vader realized something. Neither of these children were old enough to be alive during the Purge. There was no way. And there would be no feasible reason for Obi-Wan to tell them who he was unless... Before Vader could connect the dots, he ignited his lightsaber to defend himself from an aggressive strike made by Leia. Luke moved in right behind his sister, as a usually offensive Vader was placed into defense. He was completely unprepared for the aggressiveness. Most Jedi were not aggressive towards him, and even if they were, they didn't get into this kind of jump. Though Vader wasn't going to just take this, he batted away from the two young adults, parrying each of their strikes. Obi-Wan stood on edge, trying to see if he could pull his lightsaber from the wreckage, but he couldn't find it. Vader's heavy strikes threw the young duelist off a bit, but between Luke's aggression and Leia's simmering down in the Form 3, they were almost a perfect duo for beating their father. He was a powerhouse Sith Lord, and one thing he had on both of them was experience. Obi-Wan looked for a gap here. Where could he find it to assist the twins? And then he saw one. Vader blocked a high strike made by Luke, and then shot a huge wave of force through the ground as it threw Vader from his feet. Kenobi knew how to beat Vader in the suit. This was how he did it before. It was up to Luke and Leia to see if they remembered what he did when he beat the Sith Lord originally. The two Jedi moved about as Vader tried to get to his feet, but his mask was slashed open by Luke, and his head recoiled to the ground, slamming against it. Vader used the Force to push Luke away into his sister. The Dark Lord got to his feet as he looked at Obi-Wan, and then he turned to his children. They were his children, and he figured it out. As the deep brooding voice of the Dark Lord vanished, and the sound of Anakin's voice appeared.
I am your father.
Don't do this.
I have a father, and he didn't kill my mother.
Leia ignited her lightsaber. Vader tried to defend himself as he ignited his own weapon. Leia slashed it to the side, throwing the blade from her father's hand before spinning around and slashing her blade through Vader's chest. Both Obi-Wan and Luke were taken aback. Vader looked at his daughter and then his son before he was taken away into the dark abyss of the death only given by the dark side. Leia looked down at her father as she stepped away, dropping her lightsaber and falling to her knees. Luke came to his sister's side to see if she was okay, and as did Obi-Wan. Tears fell from her eyes, and once Ben got there, she wrapped her arms around him, telling him,
I'm so sorry, Ben. I'm so sorry. The darkness is so cold. It's so cold. But I had to do it. I couldn't let him cause any more pain. I'm so sorry.
Obi-Wan knew how she felt. He rubbed her back and told her that it was natural. They all had assumed that with the guidance of Revan's training, that they had surpassed the ability of faltering into the dark side, but the dark side was persuasive. It latched onto Leia and it took control of her. Obi-Wan told her that it would be okay, telling her a story of when he was a young man, and he resorted to the dark side to get revenge. Leia was so ashamed of herself. Moments later, the ghost would land, and Hera would run out to make sure that everyone was alright. Obi-Wan turned around and nodded his head. He helped Leia up and made sure she and Luke got on board, before he retrieved his lightsaber. The rebels would return to their secret base with the new Imperial technology that they had at their disposal. The strike of losing Darth Vader and Thrawn in the same night would leave shockwaves throughout the Empire. Mas Amedda would take full control, fully of the reins, and because he'd essentially been in control since the Empire was formed, he didn't struggle with it. However, Mas Amedda was no military strategist, and when word got clear that Vader was gone, Imperial officers became pushy, each of them vying for more power and more advantages in the Empire, which in turn for the Empire meant a lot of self-sabotage. The Ghost Squadron would be linked up with several operatives over the coming years, one of them being Cassian Andor, who, with his help, would lead the rebels to a victory over the Empire. Because the Death Star was sidelined for an extended period of time without funding, the rebellion would be able to find and cripple the super weapon before any of its external weapon systems were online. Of course, a strike like this was used with TIE Defenders and various other fighters, because the support fleet around the Death Star was far too large for an upfront invasion. Before Obi-Wan's natural death, he would see the beginning of a new Jedi Order, the happiness of the Skywalker twins, the resurgence of the Republic, the fallout of an empire, and dictatorship for that matter. His death would come peacefully, surrounded by a newfound family, a family of Jedi with the teachings of Revan, Skywalker, and Kenobi, in a brand new temple, in a galaxy with a chance for rebirth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Tigerboard, Darth Revan, Pim Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Mad Manny Stews, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Ben Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit the likes on this video. I don't know what's coming next, but it is the next part of the miniseries. The finale is coming out this Saturday. There's going to be a full movie for it that I will be releasing afterwards. So for those of you that don't like to watch part 1s or part 2s or part 3s or part 4s, you got a full movie coming out at some point. Anyways, let's talk about this story. There's room for a part 3 here. I would prefer not to do a part 3. Because I'm personally content with the story, but I could see where a part 3 would be kind of fun here. However, I don't really think a part 3 is necessary for this. So let's talk about the story itself. So with a story like this, it's like with a Revan thing. I've done different iterations of Revan, and considering based off how I built the first story with like Revan being a part of the dreams, I felt like that part of the journey was kind of covered, and so I wanted this step of the journey, this particular arc of the story, to be more focused on like the holocrons himself, because like the original story focused on the dream element, what that did for Luke. And again, obviously the story is titled about Luke, but in a part 2 like this, I feel like it was necessary to include Leia, and so using her power in psychometry, I can't pronounce that sometimes, psychometry. That's something that's legends based, and it's also something that's kind of been seen in canon with the Kenobi show, and her being young and still like her remembering Padme, for example. That's psychometric essentially in some way, shape, or form. And so taking that and using Revan's distinct ability to use that at certain periods is something I want to take advantage of. Psychometry, force bond. So I wanted to play to the more unique attributes of Revan while also using Leia in this, and I think force bond worked really well. Of course, like I could have put like Mara Jade in here or something like that, but I feel like we use Mara Jade a lot lately, so I decided against that. And yeah, so I felt like the ending of the last video was kind of made it set up so you guys thought that Tarkin was going to be the main bad guy, and I didn't have any plan on that being the case. If anything, he was going to be like the face of the Empire, but Tarkin just wouldn't be content with being face of the Empire. He wants to be the head honcho, I think, in a situation where Palpatine isn't around, and I don't think Vader's going to tolerate that. On the side of Darth Krayt, he was a C-plot. He was always set up to be a C-plot. And I didn't really see anywhere for him to go. You know, he bested Palpatine, and that's kind of what I wanted him to do. I talk about this often enough, but Palpatine is often like he's the main villain of all nine canon films, Disney canon films, right? And so regardless of what era I work with, he's going to be the main villain, and it gets tiresome using the same villain. And so Darth Krayt's entire purpose in the story, I saw a comment in the other video about like this isn't anything to do with what Darth Krayt's original story is. I know that. I wasn't trying to do the original Darth Krayt story. If I did, then I would have stuck to it, but I wasn't trying to do that. The whole title with What If, that's kind of what I'm doing here. And so what if Darth Krayt being in the story, you know, he's not meant to follow the original journey he follows in Legends, and that's not what I'm going for. I'm just creating another villain for the plot to kind of get rid of Palpatine and put someone new as the main threat. And I think Vader's a good main threat, and I think if he discovered, because like if you get rid of Palpatine, you have to talk about Tantus and the whole contingency plans. And so I had to make that kind of reasonable for Vader to be like kind of paranoid about that. And the main thing that Vader's thinking about is like the ability to survive death. And once he realizes that Palpatine has these cloning facilities, he's gonna be like, this dude's probably still alive, and that's an issue. And I think Vader would take that very seriously as a threat, because you know, that's what Palpatine promised, and he knows that Palpatine lies to him a lot. You know, he knows that Palpatine lies to him. That's shown, I think, in one of the comics. And so I wanted to convey Vader kind of coming to terms with the fact that he knows that Palpatine's lying to him, but also being like, I should probably make sure that he hasn't cloned himself or something. So, yeah. And then the finale of this video, I'm not gonna lie, I think that's really cool. I think it's kind of badass, honestly. Like having Leia said like that line by Leia, I'm not gonna lie, I think that's really cool. I think it's cool. It's a little bit like Marvel-esque. It's kind of like, it's like I am Iron Man, you know, that kind of whole thing. But it's I think it's a cool line. I don't know. Let me know if you guys like that line. I thought it was a cool line, you know, like I thought it was cool. I don't know. That's just me. I thought that was cool. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button. You know, miniseries comes to an end this weekend, and the next miniseries is going to come out straight afterwards. Not straight afterwards, but maybe like a couple weeks afterwards. I'm still writing it out. I got the whole plot out for the next season of the Earth series, and it's about 9 episodes, so I'm excited for you guys to see it. Otherwise, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.